The other word is favoritism. Say favoritism. This is what is called the preference test, where people prefer certain people over other people. I wish I had time to tell you about Black Lives Matter and all lives matter, but if you can't say Black Lives Matter right now, I'm not sure if all lives matter. The preference test, or what is called the test case, what he does is James sends two worshipers into the worship service, and one is rich and the other is poor. One is rich, the other one is poor. One is rich and the other one is poor. He sends these two people into the church, and guess what? The church fails the test because they prefer the one over the other. They were like the usher in Guy King's story entitled The Short-Sighted Usher. The Short-Sighted Usher. You need to read that story. It is about a distinguished looking gentleman with fashionable clothes and gold rings and watches and a watch who arrives to church. The usher bows and escorts the notable visitor to a prominent seat in the front of the church. He goes back to the door, says Guy King. This time it is a poor visitor who has humble attire. He has filthy clothes on. He is dressed poorly. And so to save the church from embarrassment, the usher sits this man in the back of the church. He shows favoritism. And the problem with our world today that we are wrestling with, even in the church and America, is this whole concept of favoritism. Do we favoritize, if you will, one race over another race? And it's occurring all over the country. Was what happened to George Floyd, was that favoritism towards white and a kind of banishment for a black man who is arrested for a $20 bill that was considered to be counterfeit. I hope nobody has any counterfeit $20 bills in here. You might get arrested. James says, my brethren, as believers, do not show respect to persons. Do not show, in verse 1, favoritism. Say favoritism. And the truth of the matter is that they could use Jesus as their example, because Jesus never showed favoritism. There was one time that he came to the well of Samaria, and there was a woman who stops by there to get water in the midday, if you will, in the heat of the day. And she is a Samaritan, but it is not Jesus who shows any kind of outcasting of this Samaritan as most Jews did, but rather Jesus embraced her. I wish I had time to preach it. He did not show favoritism to this woman who had been with 5 husbands, and the one that she had now was not hers. She had a very reckless kind of a life. But Jesus did what he does to us all the time. He looked beyond her fault and saw her need. He never showed favoritism. There was a Levite, there was a tax collector that everybody hated by the name of Matthew, and he was collecting taxes and then taking some of the tax off the top and using it for his own personal whatever. But the truth of the matter is, Matthew is not, Jesus doesn't show anything against Matthew, but rather he says to Matthew, he says, leave your booth, leave your taxes, leave your money, and follow me. He doesn't show any kind of outcasting of this Levi by the name of Matthew. No. He does not do that. There's a brother who is by the name of Zacchaeus, and he is up in a tree to look at Jesus. He could have bypassed Zacchaeus. After all, he too was a crooked person, but yet still he says to Zacchaeus, I'm not going to show any kind of outcasting of you. I'm not favoritizing those who are sitting around me, but rather he says, come down from that sycamore tree and follow me. Have I got a witness in the house? He had 12 disciples, and 3 of them were not clean disciples. In fact, they were nasty, dirty, stinking people. They were 3 fishermen. Peter, anybody gonna help me? James, Don't get relaxed behind your mask now. And John, have I got a witness in the house? He says, my brethren, as believers, do not show respect to persons' favoritism. Here's what James says in verse 2 through 4. Here's the example. He says, suppose a man comes into your church wearing gold rings and fine clothes, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in. He says, do you give special attention to the one and not the other? Do you show favoritism based upon material standing, based upon prosperity, based upon color, based upon where they live? Do you show favoritism because they drive this certain car and the other one does not drive this? Do you show favoritism because one is dressed up on Sunday morning and the other is dressed down on Sunday morning? Do you show favoritism on your job towards one person because they have a certain name and the other one has another certain kind of a name? Do you show favoritism in your life? Do you show favoritism even in your home? Are you proud of one child and not so proud of the other child? Do you show differences between the two? James says it is an evil thing. In fact, he causes sin to show. I wish I had a witness. I wish I had a maskless congregation. But I'm going to speak to the people online right now. Do you show favoritism in your life? Here's 4 reasons that I want to give why not to favor people. James says when you show favoritism towards people, it says something about the rich and it says something about the poor. Here's what he says. It says something about the poor. You dishonor a man whom God honors. When you show favoritism towards the rich and you set aside poor folk. He says, you dishonor a man or woman whom God honors. Those who are the least, God honors them. You see, that's why the problem with putting your knee on the neck of a black man who is poor is a very dangerous kind of a thing, because look at it now. Everybody across the globe has this young man's name on their mind, their heart, their spirit, their action, their movement, their marches. Everybody is talking about George Floyd. Well, it's because we outcast the poor. Here's what he says here. He says here, you dishonor man whom God honors. Here's what the Bible says in verse 5 there in chapter 2. He says, God has chosen the poor people of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him. Y'all didn't get that, did you? You see, the poor are what we call God's elect. And not only is the poor God's elect, but the poor is God's elite. And the poor, says the Bible, are heirs of God, and the poor are lovers of God. In fact, Jesus said it's even rough sometimes for those who are rich to get into the kingdom. It's like going through the eye of a needle. It's like a camel going through the eye of it. It's very hard. But for poor folk, they will sing songs like, where could I go but to the Lord, seeking a refuge for my soul? Where could I go when I could not eat anything? I needed to find Jesus, who is bread in a starving land, water when I'm thirsty, friend in an unfriendly world. I wish I had a witness. He says Jesus understood the poor because the truth of the matter is he didn't come in rich. The Bible said he left his estate. He left his mansion. He left his chariots. He left his servants. And the Bible says, though he was rich, yet for our sake he became poor that we might become rich. Have I got any rich folk in the house? Jesus was poor. He was born in Bethlehem of Judea in a cave-like entrance place. They didn't even have room for him in the inn. He had to go to the back of the inn. He had to go where the lowest went to. And then he wasn't raised in Jerusalem. He was raised in Nazareth. And when his disciples came to him, one of his disciples said, "We have found the Messiah." And the other disciple said, "No, no. Can any good thing come out of a poor place like Nazareth?" Somebody ought to be shouting right now, because when you think about how far the Lord has brought you, he brought you through Nazareth. He stopped you off at Bethlehem. You were in the ghettos of Cleveland, down in the southern part of the southern states of the United States. You ain't been in Cleveland all your life. Some of you came from West Virginia, the hills of West Virginia. Somebody came from the hills of Georgia and Mississippi River and Alabama and all of those poor areas. Somebody's here from Arkansas. Have I got a witness in the house? But God has brought us from a mighty long way. And I need to tell you, poor folk ought to be shouting right now all over the land and country, because God is on the side of the poor. The Bible says the poor are rich in faith. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Somebody ought to shout, because somebody was raised by a poor mama or daddy. Come on, stand on your feet. Somebody was raised by a poor grandmama or granddaddy. Somebody was raised by a poor aunt or uncle.